Hi, my name's Tony Ridley and welcome back to another crisis leadership and management education tutorial. In this section we're talking about stakeholder analysis and stakeholder engagement. On this particular one we're focusing on the influence of stakeholders. Stakeholders themselves are agnostic by and large until stimulated with either information, updates or content that forms an opinion. Therefore, in many instances, it's about making sure that the opinion that they form or the influence that they have is either shaped, crafted or influenced by your own crisis management processes. So first of all, we need to understand exactly how it is that stakeholders influence both our courses of action, our decision making, and certainly our ability to achieve our objectives or end states when we're talking about recovery, when we're talking about business continuity, we're talking about the non-stop service status that we want to achieve irrespective of the events that have led to this point. So when we talk about this, we're in particular from a management perspective, they can impact our decision makers, our ability to form plans, to implement plans, to access, achieve, to mobilise the resources that we need, and they can even influence our own internal mechanisms, such as it not being in a concurrence with a particular decision or processes, or just for not fully briefed and therefore confusing or frustrating the process. And our own internal management can be the first and foremost problematic process for that, particularly as we cascade down information. If it's not fully communicated or articulated well, then our own people can form a barrier or an obstacle in the final resolution. Employees, the overall effectiveness of our plan and the contribution is primarily labour-based. So for a lot of influential processes, irrespective of whether we're talking from a factory or a oil and gas company, a pharmaceutical company, a consulting company, whatever your core business is, essentially, unless you are a computer, you require employees, and they provide the engine room that runs organisations, that represents the front office, that prosecute the purchases, client liaison and so on. And also in terms of exactly how loyal they are to the organisation, and depending on the type of crisis and the information that circulates, this can test and challenge even the biggest and best organisations if the message is not being influenced or counteracted or corrected by yourselves. Media in particular, if it bleeds, it leads. The media of all sorts, whether they're trashy tabloids to online news agents to printed periodicals to the most respected news agents in the world, they're a machine and they work on being fed a regular fresh batch of fuel, which is speculation, scandal, rumour, newsworthy investigative journalism, and as a result they can and will influence public opinion and certainly have an impact, good, bad or otherwise, on your reputation. Then we have the governing bodies within our own organisation. So superior or higher to management, these can be shareholders, owners, the people that potentially hold the real authority and the real power. And again, if they're not engaged and they're not informed, and their first piece of information comes to them through a tabloid or through a third party or a provider or a close friend, then again that can frustrate and delay and cause critical communication issues and disruptions if we haven't identified this in advance. This shareholders, again, I segment this separately because they may be mutually exclusive. The board members may be appointed directors, but shareholders could be general public. If you're a shareholding company, then the ownership and the market influences and even the price of your stock can also be influenced. So again, we're talking about not only individuals but also a collective group of individuals. If they public opinion or a large body of individuals are informed or negatively aligned, then these certainly have a potential and certainly will impact the outcome of any and all crisis. And then, of course, an example of government agencies, whether they be legal, compliance, assistive, emergency services, military police, all these sorts of things. If they're not informed or they're key to your corrective action or your recovery and courses of action, then again they need to be communicated with. So these are just some of the examples of how stakeholders can influence the organisations, and in no small part they can then contribute to how and why you engage, and these are the things that you have to look at. So when and how you engage them, it can determine the medium in which you communicate with them, how wide or how narrow, the most effective platforms, whether that be video, written message, courier, face-to-face, the information content in which is contained, and certainly making sure that that message is singular in nature and it's not going to be found or contradicted somewhere else. And it determines the frequency in which you communicate in terms of how soon or how delayed, what information you need first, what is relevant in terms of, is it a scheduling issue, you communicate every few minutes, every few hours, or they simply get it in the news updates along with everybody else, and the frequency. So essentially, we need to understand that they can and will influence our decision-making process and certainly the outcomes, and then this will lead us to determine how and when we communicate with them and what are the effective mediums and frequencies. And it's not until we start to document this, and this can't be simply intuitive, we need to document and map this process, because then very quickly we can see how our own decision-making cycles are being influenced. What sort of documentation, what sort of lead time do we require? Is there approval processes before a press release can go out? All of these practical aspects need to be broken down, or certainly articulated not only in the plan but also the brief back in terms of your courses of action to say what you plan to do. You need to factor all of this in there as well. So again, we've spoken about shareholder influence in terms of identification and the impacts that it may have. Once again, thanks very much for joining us. For more information and further tutorials on crisis education, crisis leadership and management, please go to the website at www.crisismanagement.tony-ridley.com. That's all for now. Thanks and goodbye.